I think it's safe to say that every man has at one time or another tried to impress a woman, but Grigory Alexandrovich Potemkin takes the cake when you talk about trying to impress a woman. Potemkin was a commander during the Russian-Turkish War in the late 18th century, 1768 through 1764, 74 rather, to be exact. And this man was instrumental. I love it. This man, Potemkin, was instrumental in helping Catherine the Great seize power in 1762 in Russia. Now, Potemkin, because he was such a great commander, a great leader, and he did so much for Catherine the Great, he later became her lover. Now, Potemkin worked hard to try to expand and improve Catherine's kingdom, especially the countries of Crimea and the Ukraine. Now John and I have been to the Ukraine, but you have to think back to the 18th century, and these were still very much underdeveloped countries, the Crimea and the Ukraine. They were extremely poor, they were underdeveloped, and so Russia annexed them. That is, they took them under their wing and began to develop them, and Potemkin was key in doing that. He wanted to make Crimea, particularly, the showplace of Catherine's kingdom. He wanted Crimea to be this diamond that she could be proud of as part of all of her conquests and the fact that she was now ruling Russia. Well, there was one problem. He wants Crimea to be this great country that she can ride down the river and look over at and think, oh, that's so beautiful. That's part of my kingdom. But there was one problem. The problem is that Crimea was underdeveloped, extremely poor, full of people who were extremely poor. There weren't any resources. So what do you do? What do you do if you, as a leader, as an army leader, as a leader in this new government, want to develop this country that has no money to be developed? What do you do? And what he did, he came up with this brilliant idea. To impress her, Potemkin constructed elaborate facades along the riverbank. Now here's, if you have trouble understanding that, facade literally means the front of something. So if you're looking at blueprints, for instance, or you're looking at elevation drawings, and you look at the facade, you're looking at the front. But what it also has come to mean is something that is put out as true, but is not. It is deceptive. And the way that you can think about it, if it helps you, is in Hollywood. When they make a movie, they build facades. They don't actually go in. Sometimes they go into real towns or real cities and shoot, but other times, like especially with older westerns, they put up fronts of buildings, fronts of general stores and saloons. But when you look behind it, it's nothing but 2x4s running from the top of that prop all the way down to the ground, holding it up. So from the front, it looks like, wow, that's a pretty neat looking saloon. And you walk behind and there's nothing there. That is a facade. And so what Potemkin did was, along the riverbank of the Dnieper River, he built all of these nice facades so that when Catherine the Great would float down the river in a boat down the Dnieper River, she could look on each side and see all of these beautiful villages and all of these beautiful huts. The problem is there were people that were poor, they had nothing to give, and what little resources were left, Potemkin took and put into building these elaborate facades. Now let me say for the record that there are those who study history who say there is not much evidence that he did this on an elaborate scale. There are others who said he spent just about drained the rest of the money from the Ukraine and the Crimea to get it done. So those who watch from home, if you're a history buff, you may go read someone who says, no, that didn't really happen, and others say that it did. The concept has remained, is my point. And so, when Catherine the Great would come down the river, all of the dregs, all the poor people, all of the shanties, the lean-tos that were falling down, the old dilapidated things were torn down. All the poor people, all the sick, all the crippled were pushed way back away from the riverbank. And only those impressive, more well-dressed people were seen, along with all of these elaborate facades. Here's what you need to understand as we begin this lesson. Potemkin villages were erected for two reasons: to hide the truth of what was really there, and to bring a sense of glory and goodness and accomplishment to those who were putting them up. See, Potemkin was a great army commander, and he did a lot of good things, but he built those facades not only to impress Catherine, but also to say, look at what I've done. Now, Mr. Potemkin's MO, or as we say, modus operandi, survives today and can be seen in our culture when the president comes to town. On occasion, throughout the year, the president of the United States will visit different cities. Whether he's trying to raise money for his campaign or whatever, he will go to cities, sometimes big cities, sometimes smaller cities, particularly when he goes to the smaller cities, like in Iowa, as he gets ready for the caucuses and all of the stuff that goes on with the election. What do you think those cities do? You know what they do. They clean up in a big way. I mean, if the walls of the buildings where he's going to be driving down in the motorcade on that street, those walls will be pressure washed. They will be cleaned. If he indeed stays at a hotel somewhere, there will be new carpet. There will be probably new sheets. At the place where he'll be speaking publicly, there will be everything in that venue will be either cleaned thoroughly or will be brand new. And if in town you have any winos or dregs or people that kind of walk around and talk to themselves, you can better believe that they're going to be pushed aside, taken way to the other side of town, because we don't want the president to see them. Now, that the ugly underbelly of any city where he visits is not gone. It has not been dealt with. It's simply swept under the rug. And so these cities, these towns where the president comes, erect Potemkin villages. They clean up, they spit shine everything so that the president can be proud. Hey, this is a fine landmark here in these United States. But also to hide all the stuff that's not so pretty. And so when I get to this part, I say, isn't it great to know that we Christians never build Potemkin villages in our lives? And for those of you who don't know me, that's called sarcasm. Tongue firmly planted in cheek. Jesus says this: if you hold to my teaching, then you are really my disciples, and then you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. Truth sets you free. If you want to be truly free as a Christian, then you know Jesus, have a relationship with him, have faith in him, and hold to what he says. And he says you will be free. And so when we choose a relationship with Christ, then all of our past mistakes, all of our past bumblings, knuckleheaded moves, flat out sin has been erased. And we don't have to pretend anymore. We don't have to pretend that we have always been perfect. We don't have to pretend that we're now perfect, because we're surrounded by people who feel the same way. We're surrounded by people who understand, man, I'm not proud of where I've been, but that's where I've been. Jesus dealt with that. He buried it. You don't have the right to dig it up. Neither do I. That's what freedom is all about. And so, isn't it good to know that any person who wants to walk in and find that kind of freedom in an environment can walk through any church door, any place in Christendom, and find it and feel welcome? Isn't it great to know that a person seeking Jesus can talk to any Christian of any flavor, denominationally, and find the answers to life's questions? Is anybody like me feeling maybe a little nauseous right now, maybe a little trip to the bathroom, thinking about past experiences and maybe the way I have acted or you have acted? See, the truth of the matter is that we disciples, that Christians, are often just as guilty as schools, as businesses, as Grigory Potemkin himself in erecting facades. Why try and hide it? If the truth sets you free, just be truthful, right? Right, okay, so let me be truthful with you. I have been guilty of building Potemkin villages in front of my life. And I did so for the first 7 years of ministry because I was encouraged by those around me not to let the truth set me free from my past. And here's what I mean. I was told by those who knew me, people in the pews don't really need to know where you've been, because you will lose credibility. And you'll lose respectability. And so I built these huge Potemkin villages right in front of the pulpit so that people would have a false sense of me. They wanted the old authority, respectable, never been puked on, sitting up on a pedestal kind of preacher. because they said to me, if people know your track record, they'll think less of you. Once worthless, always worthless, was the way the thinking went. And so I put on my best preacher face and told rosy red illustrations and told, try to have nice 3-point in a poem and a prayer kind of sermon so that everybody feels blissful and walks out toes intact. And I remember looking out at lots and lots of people who were building their own Potemkin villages in front of their life using things like makeup and jewelry and the finest clothes available. Now, I think most of us would expect that worldly people would want to build those kinds of villages in front of their life. But the question for today that I want us to think about and consider is, why would we, as Christians, bye. Isn't that sweet? Don't you love a church where that can happen and everybody just goes, there's been a break in the service. I need a drink anyway. You guys didn't know I was a heavy drinker, did you? Woo, Diet Mountain Dew, got to have it. Why would we, if the truth truly sets us free, why would we feel the need to build Potemkin villages around or in front of our real selves? I think there are a few reasons, and I believe that it's Jesus who gives us the greatest insight into this phenomenon by giving us an upfront, up close and personal view of the Pharisees. Now, those of you that have been around for a while know I've talked a lot about this before, but in Jesus' day, there were no group of men who were more highly regarded in every single aspect of society and spiritual matters and everything than the Pharisees. They were the zenith of spirituality in Jesus' day. They settled disputes as judges. What they said was the same, for the most part, as what the law of Moses said. What came out of their mouths was taken by the people to be just as strong and just as binding as what God himself had said. That's how much pull, that's how much influence they had in the first century. Not just the first century, but particularly in the days of Jesus. And so, they were the protectors of Judaism. They were the ones who tried to keep the Greco-Roman infidels and all the Hellenization stuff of the Greek culture out of Judaism. In fact, their very name, if you follow the etymology and the background of what a Pharisee means, it means religious piety, purity, and holiness. They were the creme de la creme for God. But the Pharisees were also the world's best Potemkin village builders. They had it down cold. And so Jesus systematically, in several passages, dismantles their facade behavior and exposes them for what they really are, frauds. That's what a Potemkin village is. It's a fraud. It's deceptive. It's something in disguise. Now remember that everything that was written down in the past was written for our learning and for our encouragement. So let's see if this applies. Why would we, as Christians, if the truth has set us free, why would we want to build a facade in front of who we really are or who we were? I think there are several reasons. First of all, I think Christians build these villages because some people still just have to have kudos from other people. And no, kudos are not those little grain bars that taste really good like a candy bar. Kudos are back pats. Attaboys. Oh, that's so good. Oh, you're so good. You did so great. That's so wonderful. That's what kudos are. Listen what Jesus says in the Sermon on the Mount from Matthew 6, translation from the Message. Be especially careful when you're trying to be good so that you don't make a performance out of it. It might be good theater, but the God who made you won't be applauding. When you do something for someone else, don't call attention to yourself. You've seen them in action, I'm sure. Play actors, I call them. Treating prayer meeting and street corner alike as a stage. Acting compassionate as long as someone is watching. Playing to the crowds. They get applause, true. But that's all they'll get. Sometimes our approval compass gets miscalibrated. We point our compass in the direction of other people. Now, if we're honest, we'll say, yeah, but most of the time we want to please other people. Even Paul says, I try to please everybody in what I do. But that's not what this is talking about. This is going beyond just wanting to please other people. I have seen it, you have seen it time and time again, where there are Christians who want to be out front, on top, leading the way. Whether it's demonstrating their gift of singing or drama or something that they can say or do or whatever, they've got to be out front. They want everyone to know about it. And outwardly, sometimes we look at them and think, boy, they're so talented and they have so many gifts, and we want to emulate them. We want to look at them and say, well, that person is really spiritually mature. That's a real leader. Somebody that I hope my kids can imitate or whatever. And yet, it's nothing but a facade to try and cover up their empty, hurting, bankrupt, passionless lives. Because they so have to have the kudos from other people that they can't survive without it. So they're constantly having to be out front. Constantly. And I've known ministers where we have shared a friendship in the same town who would not let anyone stand in their pulpit and preach. And I remember saying to one guy, brother, it's not your pulpit. It's not even your church's denomination. It's not their pulpit. In fact, for 300 years, there was no such thing as an ambo, as a pulpit. It's not yours. Now, personally, that's the one thing I've never struggled with. I love for Todd to come and speak, or Randall's. I have no problem with it. I like the break. This is not my pulpit. I don't need the kudos. Sure, back pats are nice. Sure, we got to give honor where honor's due. Sure, we should say thank you and you helped me. Those kinds of things. But you got to be sure and turn it up and give the praise and the honor to whom it really goes. Because it doesn't come to me. What is it that they have missed, those who need this sort of approval? What is it that they have misunderstood? God says, when you give to somebody, don't tell your left hand what your right hand is doing. Give your gifts in secret, and your Father, who knows all secrets, will reward you. What brings down our Potemkin village is understanding that it's God's approval that we seek, not people. That's absolutely key. That is hard for me to balance, pleasing people and pleasing God, and finding a balance in there. Because a lot of times when you do it just to please God, you don't please other people. But when your compass gets miscalibrated, that's how you recalibrate it. Is point it in the direction it goes. What God says here is, just do it in secret. The real reward is coming later, and it's much better than an attaboy and pats on the back. Other times, I think disciples build Potemkin villages because they want to impress other people. It's not just getting kudos. It's not just being able to walk by and have everybody go, oh, you're so wonderful, but it is to impress them. So that they can look at you and say, wow, man, what a guy, what a gal. Jesus says about prayer, when you pray, don't be like the play actors, the hypocrites, who love to pray publicly on the street corners in the synagogues where everyone can see them. I assure you, that is all the reward they will ever get. One of the best ways, I like this passage because one of the best ways, I think, in some settings where one Christian tries to impress other Christians is through public prayer. Not many people get a chance to preach and teach, okay? But lots of people over time have the shot at praying in public, and I like it. I get a kick out of it. I'm not making fun of them. I just get a kick out of people who try so hard to sound spiritual by stringing together all these prayer phrases so that they sound really mature and really spiritually superior to other people. I especially like the people who, when they pray, they quote scripture to God and then tell God where it is. God, you told us in John 14:6 that Jesus is the way, the truth, and the... I think God knows where John 14:6 is. God, you said in Matthew 28:18 that Jesus has all authority, and so... I'm not making fun of anybody. I'm just saying God knows where it is He wrote the book. It's kind of like walking into the library and trying to tell the librarian how to do her job. Well, really, you ought to sort of put that book over. No, I've got it. I've been here a long time. I know how to handle the books. God knows where it comes from. If you pray in public in such a way so that you try to impress other people, so that when people hear you pray, they just go, oh, wow, what a really spiritually mature person. Jesus says that's the only reward you'll ever get if you do it for that reason. That's why I've said on many occasions, I love to hear Larry Couch pray. Known Larry for almost 7 years. And I've seen this shift from the stringing together prayer phrases to just a heartfelt, here's who I am, God. Here's who we are. And then I get chill bumps just thinking about it, because I've seen a maturity not in using bigger and more theological language, but in more simple, here I am, I'm open kind of language. Not to impress people, just being honest before God. Is it possible that sometimes Christians forget to whom they are speaking? You know, the story about the little boy who gets up on a Wednesday night and they let him pray and read announcements on Wednesday night, and he's praying and he's thanking God for all the people, thanking God for all he's done, thanking God for school, and thanking God for Nintendo, and he's thanking God. And this older, devout Christian comes to him afterwards and says, son, when we pray publicly, we don't thank God for things like Nintendo and worldly material possessions. And the little boy said, I'm sorry, sir, I wasn't talking to you. And that little boy should have taught that man something about prayer. To whom are we speaking? And when you come before God, don't turn that into a theatrical production either. All these people making a regular show out of their prayers, hoping for stardom. Do you think God sits in a box seat? I love that. Here's what I want you to do. Find a quiet, secluded place so that you won't be tempted to role play before God. Just be there as simply and honestly as you can manage. The focus will shift from you to God, and you will begin to sense His grace. This is your Father you're dealing with, and He knows better than you what you need. To whom are we speaking? Don't pray, don't do anything that we might consider spiritual acts of righteousness to try and impress somebody. Do it quietly, do it secretly, and the real reward will come later. I think sometimes God's children build Potemkin villages because of faulty investments. When we invest all of our time, all of our resources, all of our energy, all of our devotion into this world, and forgive me, all of you who own rent houses, it's like paying rent. Rent is something that's needed, but as a person who has to pay the rent, you might as well be dropping your money out of a plane at 30,000 feet. It provides you a place to live, but you have nothing to show for it other than that. When you invest all your time and resources and energy into the things of this world, it's like paying rent, and you'll have nothing to show for it. If we pour lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of things into this world and all the things this world provides, it's like you're paying for temporary housing. There is no equity in that. And so here's what Jesus says. Don't store up treasures here on earth where they can be eaten by moths and get rusty, and where thieves break in and steal. Store your treasures rather in heaven, where they will never become moth-eaten or rusty, or where they will be safe from thieves. Wherever your treasure is, there your heart and your thoughts will also be. Jesus is saying, don't try to build equity in something that's not going to last. That's like going to Las Vegas where they say, in 2 weeks, we're going to implode the Sands. We're going to implode it, we're going to wipe that spot clean, and we're going to build up something else, Trump Hotel or something. But we're going to demolish the Sands. That'd be like going over and going, all right, how can I invest my money in the future of the Sands Hotel? How can I do it? You're like, wait a minute, it's going to destroy it in 2 weeks. I don't care. I want to invest in it. Well, that's crazy. It's just as crazy to have your heart set on the things of the world that are not going to last. Faulty investments. And I think sometimes Christians get misguided again, thinking that, have you ever heard this one? I love this. When we all come together, when we all assemble together, you gotta wear your very, very best. You bring God your very, very best. And I say, amen. So you leave those highfalutin clothes in the closet and bring your heart, and then you've brought the very best. Because I've seen people who can't bring the very best in the way that many people define that. And so they don't come, or they walk in, they look around and go, whoo. Feels like I'm wearing a Hawaiian shirt at a black tie event. And they turn around and walk out. I've seen it with God as our witness with my own two eyes. And I vowed on that day I will never again ever make anybody feel like they have to dress or look a certain way to come. Can you imagine the woman of ill repute going, let's see, where is my very finest whore dress that I can wear? I'm going to see Jesus. She came as she was. She fell at his feet. She wept at his feet, used her hair to clean him, and essentially said, forgive me. And Jesus says, this woman who has loved much is forgiven much. Faulty investments. If God thought that Giorgio Armani and Donna Karan dresses were something that he felt was highly important, you would have been born with them on. If God thought that having a lot of cash money was the bomb, you would have been born clutching gold nuggets. But guys, listen, God uses gold for asphalt. If he paves the streets of heaven with them, that's asphalt. So he doesn't care that much about it. The reality is you were born naked, buck naked. You will leave this world buck naked. No, you won't take that suit that has no pockets in it with you. Naked I came, naked I go. Job says, dust to dust. The question becomes, what happens in between? What happens in the dash? Randy Harris, 1966 dash, whenever. What happened in the dash part? Right there. If it was all Giorgio Armani and cash on the barrelhead and IRAs and fancy cars and luscious, lavish homes, then I've invested poorly. What Jesus is saying is you need to spend your lifetime building relationships, not fortunes. Because you can build all the fortunes in the world. Many people spend their lives making and spending and losing fortunes. But when you leave this place, whether you've got a penny to your name or you're a multi-billionaire vis-a-vis Bill Gates, you won't take it with you. Look around and see what you'll take with you. The flesh and blood seated around you. Better to bank on people in heaven so that our hearts will be securely invested in God. I want to close with this story. One of the ancient kings of Persia loved to mingle with his people in disguise. He was very wealthy. The kings of Persia, if you read history, were extremely wealthy. And one king in particular loved to dress up in disguise and go out and mingle with the common man. Kind of like Jasmine in Aladdin, the Disney movie, right? And so he descended a long flight of stairs in one of his castles, and he went down and he began to talk with what they called the fireman, the furnace keeper of the castle. And the king sat down beside him in full disguise and began to talk. At mealtime, the furnace keeper produced water and some coarse black bread, and they shared a meal together. The king went away, but he came back time and time again because his heart was filled with sympathy for the lonely man. As time passed, they became quite good friends. And so he decided one time, I think I'll tell this guy who I am. I'm interested to see what he will ask of me when I tell him that I'm the king of this castle. And so he did tell him, I am the king. And he thought to himself, what will he ask? And the furnace keeper didn't ask for a thing. The king was astonished and said, don't you realize who I am? Don't you realize that I can give you anything? I can give you a city. I can put you on a throne. I can make you commander of all my armies. I can get you out of this dungeon. You can ask me for anything. And the furnace keeper said, I understand perfectly, Your Majesty. You have already given the greatest gift a man could ever receive. You left your palace to come and sit with me here in this dark and lonely place. You could give nothing more precious. You have given yourself, and that is far more than I ever deserved.